Thanks, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. My name is Dr. Kevin Stuart. I'm a consultant here at the Leeds Teaching Hospitals. I'm a chemical pathologist, which means I work in the laboratory, but I've coupled that with metabolic medicine, which means that I see patients who suffer with obesity, high cholesterol, and a rare disease called porphyria, or umbrella diseases. And I've been asked today to come by and give a talk on healthy weight, which is interesting because I don't normally look at it from this angle. It's mainly about when it's excess weight. So the topic this afternoon is healthy weight. And so hopefully God can help all of us to understand what that is, and so that we can apply that to our lives. Okay, next slide. So just to start out with the beginning, really, that, God created the earth. It's very complex, it's very balanced, and it's, a very tight, integrated system. The fact that it was flawless coming out of his hands, and that everything was very good and in balance. Next slide. And that's very similar to man. When God created man, he formed us in his image with his hands and his likeness, and created man in balance, to reflect him, and all systems were working and in perfect accord. And that's where he wants us to get back to. Next slide. And because of this, starting from cells all the way through to organs and then ending up with the human, all of these systems work in and between each other, communicating and sympathizing with each other. Next slide. And the true steady state is God, because he says, I am the Lord and I change not. Malachi 3 verse 6. Next slide. And he encourages us to come into, the environment with him, to abide in him, because he's the constant environment. Next slide. So that's all to introduce the spiritual aspect of what we call in physical terms homeostasis, and that the body really likes things to be in balance, and everything it does is trying to get it back into balance. New slide, next slide. And homeostasis affects all organs of the body, from our brain, kidneys, blood cells, and even down to our weight. Next slide. So we've just been through this pandemic, and it's affected the Earth system, and individually, collectively as nations, and worldwide, affected us all. And many people during lockdown actually recognized that their weight may have gone up a bit. Some people used the time and their weight went down. But all of us would have had some experience with our weight during this lockdown period. Next slide. It is out of kilter, out of balance, because what we're seeing worldwide now is that weight where people are suffering with obesity has tripled since 1975. And that, there's 1.9 billion adults in 2016, and those numbers are going up rapidly. And 39% of adults aged 18 and over are overweight or obese. And that more people are now overweight and dying from disease of being overweight than those historically being from underweight diseases. And our children are also being affected as well. And ultimately, it's preventable. Next slide. And this slide is just to show the same trend, but across countries. And even in Ireland, it's going up, and also in England, going up. And the trend is just constantly upward. And what can we do about it? Not only do we need to maintain healthy weights individually, but also as communities, populations, nations, and internationally. Next slide. So this is an interesting slide. It shows 6 women of different heights, sizes, and shapes. And the question is, who of these have a healthy weight? Is it the lady on the left? Is it one of the ladies in the middle? Is it the lady on the right? Next slide. And in fact, they all weigh the same. All of these women have the same exact weight of 154 pounds. Now, we can see then that if they all have the same weight isn't healthy for all of them based on their shape and their size. So it may be a healthy weight for the person on the right, but that same weight is not healthy for the person on the left. And so it's quite an individual thing, healthy weight. What is my healthy weight? And it's really asking ourselves to look inward and at ourselves and not to look externally. Next slide. So to do this on a clinical basis and to standardize measurement, we use something called the body mass index. And that's really your weight in kilograms divided by your height squared. And a healthy weight then is defined as a BMI between 18.5 to 24.9. Next slide. Also, weight when it goes too low or too high can also be defined on this scale. Too low is less than 18.5, I should have said, and too high is in categories. So, pardon me, the category of overweight is 25 to 29.9. Obesity begins at a BMI of 30 to 34.9 is level 1. Level 2 is 35 to 39.9, and level 3, 40 or more. Next slide. But this can be affected by ethnicity because the majority of studies were done on Caucasian population. And now as we do more research within different populations, we find that the threshold for obesity might actually be lower. So the BMI of 30 and above for obesity in the Caucasian population, actually for South Asians, it's more like 23.9. For the Black population is 28.1, Chinese population 26.9, and Arab populations 26.6. So not only do you need to look internally and just at yourself, but you have to take your own race into consideration as well. So should I use the 30 cutoff? Should I use the 28.1 cutoff? You know, it really depends on your ethnicity and your background. Okay, next slide. To help you calculate all of this without punching in numbers, this is a quick chart, that you can use to say, okay, I am, 5'10", and my weight is, 86 kilograms. Am I underweight, healthy weight, overweight, obese, extreme? You just, trace it out with your finger and see where you land. And just to remind you again, this is based on the Caucasian population. You might have to adjust that based on your ethnicity. Next slide. So another way to do this, a simpler way, some may say, is to look at your waist circumference. So for men, if your waist, and it's measured just above the navel as shown in the image, is above 37 inches, that's a problem. And for women, again, shown just above the navel in the image, if it's more than 32 inches, again, that's a problem. You can do your hips as well, again, shown in the image, do your waist to hip ratio. And if you're not convinced by just your waist measurement, that can also show you if you are, out of the right shape. And it's giving you the racial thresholds there on the right. Next slide. So How do we get to a healthy weight? You know, we've done the calculations, we've done the measurements. Maybe we're perfect, fantastic. But if we're carrying too much weight, how do we get there? Too little weight, I haven't really looked at that because, as I said, the trend in society is upward. And so we find that underweight is usually then an issue psychologically with maybe anorexia or other forms of self punishment. But usually, if you're just living in society without, you know, those psychological potential issues, then your weight potentially is easier to go up than down. So I've focused this mainly on overweight rather than underweight. And if you are overweight, how do you get to a healthy weight? And then two, once you get to the healthy weight, how do you maintain it? Next slide. So some people say it's simple. It's just like, you know, first law of thermodynamics. You get energy in and energy out, and you kind of left with a kind of change or steady state. But is it really that simple? Next slide. This is in terms of weight and energy as well, using the same principle. If we eat 5 units of energy, we burn only 4 units of energy, then we store an extra unit of energy than the day we started. Is it that simple? Next slide. The answer is no. It's not that simple. We have all of these genetics and other things involved. Next slide. We've also got, this is an excellent slide because it shows us the impact not only of our biology, but also our environment. And we recognize from this slide that it's an interplay between our environment and our biology. And therefore, when we're trying to get to a healthy weight, we have to understand all of these aspects. How does stress impact on us? Sleep? How do our genetics? When I look at my family, my mom and dad, my aunts and uncles, are they slim, healthy, active people? Or do they tend to be, as they grow older, gain more weight? What can I do about my genetics? And how do I put my genetics in the right environment to enable this healthy weight? Looking at your food environment, you know, what do I eat? Where do I have lunch? Am I taking my food to work? When I'm shopping in the supermarket, am I going down the central aisles with all the goodies, or am I staying in the outer aisles with the natural foods, the fruits, the veg, the nuts, the seeds, the whole grains? You know, where am I? What is my focus? Am I playing computer games and social media, watching movies and popcorn? You know, or am I out cycling and active and walking up hills? And, you know, am I an outdoorsy kind of person? What's my gut microbiota doing? We found that we've got more gut microbiome than our own cells. And so therefore, anything that affects our gut flora significantly impacts on our environment and our ability to maintain a healthy weight. So all of these things interplay. And, you know, if you're in the wrong environment where you're surrounded by high carb, high fat foods, and you're hungry, you know, if you're not in a socially environment where you can afford to buy, you know, healthy foods, or you live on a street and just to get to your door, you're passing, you know, 4 or 5 takeaways, it makes it easier to kind of grab the wrong things. So what's our environment and our genes like, and how can we position ourselves to maximize them for the best good when we're talking about healthy weight? Next slide. And this just takes it all into other realms as well, our social influences, our individual psychology, our individual activity, our activity environment. So not just our food environment, but our activity environment, our food consumption, our biology, our societal influences. And some, you know, some study team have tried to map all of these together And this is just showing you the full kind of interplay of everything that can lead to our final weight. So it's very complex. Next slide. Next slide. So why talk about sugar? Because I believe that sugar is linked to our weight, and that, you know, our bodies, to manage the sugar, uses the organ, as we can see, front and center, as published in Nature, this article, of the pancreas. And the pancreas has several cells, including the beta cells, which produce insulin. Next slide. And we find that insulin is produced after meals to help balance out our sugar. And insulin is one of these hormones that helps us to store. It's in nature, it builds, it's anabolic, it stores things, and it helps us to put this energy away. So if we're eating high sugar foods and we're getting lots of insulin releases, then we will be storing, and therefore our weight potentially will be going up and up and up. Next slide. So therefore, when our weight goes up and up and up, it can cause these problems. It can cause cardiovascular diseases, such as heart disease and stroke, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, a whole host of problems, even down to cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, colon cancer. Next slide. Mentally, anxiety, depression, self-esteem, stigma is a real issue. Weight stigma is a real issue. A lot of my patients explain that, you know, they're scared to go out for exercise because they don't want to be verbally abused. And so, you know, it impacts on people and their activity. Some people have left jobs because colleagues have made comments. Some people are afraid to travel. So, the psychology of weight and obesity is a real thing, and bias and prejudice and stigma, these can also come as we gain weight as well. Next slide. So when I'm taking a history from a patient, or when we're asking or looking at ourselves, we can use New Start. Which of these areas am I weak in? Is my nutrition sugar heavy? Is it high fatty, high carb, brown looking foods? Am I exercising enough? Am I making time to walk the hour a day? I know it says half an hour a day, but actually really it should be more like an hour a day. Am I active enough in my day? Am I drinking enough water? Sunlight, temperance, I'm sure you've seen this before. Air, rest, and trust. How are these? When I ask myself, these questions, is my life in balance in these areas? And truthfully reflect on this, because the areas that can require improvement, those areas as they improved would result in weight improvement towards your healthy weight. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry. So what would be some advice? So if insulin is the issue, which is triggered by sugars, then we want to cut out anything that is sugary. So cutting out the obvious things like cakes, biscuits, chocolates, sweetbreads, any sugary drinks, including fruit juices, white rice, white bread, white pasta, English potatoes. All of these things essentially are sugar, and therefore can easily lead to us gaining weight because of this insulin release. Next slide. So these are the foods we just described. Next slide. Sugary drinks to avoid. Next slide. However, these are the types of foods that we need to be eating more of. Look at the color, look at the vigor, look at the life. And that's really what we want to get from these types of foods. Next slide. So foods to eat and foods to avoid. Avoid the high fat, high sugar, high salt, high protein, low fiber, low nutrient. And go for more high fiber, high nutrition, low sugar, low salt, low fat. Um, and so you would see that the different types of foods would have different effects, again, on your blood sugar levels, and therefore how much energy is stored, and therefore how much weight is retained. And if we want to lose weight, we want to eat more towards the healthier options on the left and avoid the foods on the right. And we can see the difference in contrast, isn't it? On the right, we can see brown and white foods, where on the left, we can see very colorful, rainbow type foods. Next slide. Some of us may have heard about the CHIP program, and they're just like the image, really, showing what a healthy plate of food and how colorful it is. That's why we put that one in there. Next slide. Other foods, again, like the optimal diet, again, you can see on their, the page, the colorfulness of the foods. I mean, you could also Google things like diabetes reversal diet, those types of foods that you see, again, fit this category. And we can see that on this, this book here, it says recipes to reverse and prevent obesity, which, as we said earlier, is excess weight. Next slide. So several of us may have heard of Dr. Chidi, and he says that because the body is one system, any advice that will benefit one area could also benefit other areas. So for diabetes reversal, he says very similar things that I've extracted that would also lead to healthy weight for us as well today. Potentially thinking about 2 meals a day rather than 3, going for a walk potentially before breakfast, I would advise 30 to 60 minutes. Then after each meal, probably 15 to 20 minutes. But then that adds up significantly to your hour plus walking that's required every day. Now, drinking water mainly as your main drink, and again, eating greens, beans, and vegetables, ideally with no sauces, and eating simple dressings can actually have a big impact. And try to introduce more fruits and vegetables as you go. Next slide. So there are several diets out there published in the literature, and the very low calorie diet, they say if you lose about 15 kilograms, which is about 2 stone, you can reverse diabetes. And some people do this by reducing calories. Now, if you know your calorie amount, so how do you do that? There are some apps out there that might calculate it for you, such as MyFitnessPal. And if you download that app and you put in your information, your height, your weight, it would calculate what the calories are for you to maintain your weight at the level that you currently are. Then to lose weight, they might take 500 calories off of that. So an example, roughly we say an active man should be eating 2,500 calories, an active woman, 2,000 calories. So roughly, if you take 500 calories from those and you want to lose weight as a man or a woman without doing any calculations, you'll be thinking about 1,500 calories for women, 2,000 calories for men, and that type of thing. But you can personalize it if you use these apps, again, like MyFitnessPal. Next slide. Again, looking at New Start specifically, the foundation of all weight loss happens at the table. So I always say to my patients, weight loss happens at the table. And it is the bedrock of gaining a healthy weight. I say to my patients, try to control your portion sizes, which we would talk a bit about later. And one of them, I said, how come, what's going on? Why are you not losing weight? What's happening? And are you eating less? Yes, I'm eating less. And eventually it turned out they were eating less takeaways, but still eating the takeaways, but just less each time they ate. But that's changing the portion, but not actually the underlying nutrition on the plate. And so addressing the nutrition on the plate is vital to weight loss. Next slide. Activity, build it into the day. So if you can't exercise, say you're in a wheelchair, or if you've fractured your leg and you can't move at the moment, the key thing is to reduce your time of inactivity. So regular activity is better than no activity at all. So for instance, in your desk job, you should try to stand up every hour. If you're sitting, you should be moving your legs, tapping from side to side, just fidgeting really, bringing your arms out. If you can stand and walk for 5 minutes and then go back to the desk. And so try to introduce activity into the day. We know that regular physical activity helps to control weight. It helps to reduce the risk of developing diabetes, improves your response to insulin, bring your sugars level back down, and controls your blood pressure. So if you can't exercise, and when I say exercise, I don't mean the gym. I'm talking about going outside in the fresh air for walking. And we found that walking is actually the best exercise for fat loss. So walking preferentially uses fat as energy, especially when you're walking in the morning before breakfast. That targets your fat stores for energy. And that's even potentially better than what we call HIIT, high intensity interval training. So HIIT is very good if your fitness levels have improved and your weight is beginning to slow down. You can start to introduce HIIT. But if someone is starting for the very first time, the best exercise is walking. If you can't weight bear, the best exercise might be supported in the swimming pool, and it could be just swimming or aqua aerobics or cycling on a stationary bike or walking on one of these air kind of like treadmills that would actually take and cushion your weight. If you're wheelchair bound, you can't do any of that, then as I said, fidgeting, bringing your arms up and moving between commercials. Every time a commercial comes on, an advertisement comes on, getting up if you're sitting watching TV or something, doing the housework, cleaning up, sweeping, vacuuming, all of that is regular exercise. And gardening, if you have a garden, that is really good as well, good activity. And gardening, you find that sometimes you're bending into the soil, sometimes you're standing, sometimes you're walking to take things, to dump them. And so you get that kind of interval kind of training as well with the gardening. So those types of activity are excellent. But recognize that activity is said to only reduce your weight by about 2 to 5%. That the majority of weight loss, again, happens at the table. Next slide. Water, again, the best drink for very obvious reasons. It gets rid of any unnecessary sugars, unnecessary additives. Our body is 60 to 70% water, our brain maybe even more. So staying hydrated, it takes away the hunger drive. So if you're feeling hungry, just have a drink of water, wait for 10 to 15 minutes or so, drink some more water. And if you're still thinking that you're getting hunger signals, then you're truly hungry. Next slide. Sunlight, vitamin D deficiency has been implicated in, obesity and the metabolic syndrome, as we can see from the slide. But also, we found that in COVID, when we were, locked away from the sun, let's say, that levels of vitamin D potentially were thought to be linked to high COVID, but that's been recently found in an RCT to not be true. However, vitamin D deficiency is found to actually cause our weight to increase and increase our metabolic syndrome. So sunlight is very important, and eating foods which might have been fortified with vitamin D is also very important, especially in the deep winter when we have no sunlight. Next slide. So when I talk about temperance, I think this is really good when we're thinking about maintaining a healthy weight. We're thinking about our portion sizes. Are we going back for second helpings? Especially when we or our family or relatives cook an excellent meal, it's very tempting, not to go back for a second helping. Looking at our snacks, what do our snacks look like? Are they brown? Are they white? Are they high sugar, high carb? Or are they colorful and, low in calorie, fruits and vegetables, those types of things? Avoid all things that are harmful, so simple carbs, and the judicious use of things that we can use, such as complex carbs. So things there like sweet potato might be a better carb to use. Squash, those types of things might be better carbs to use. But even in those carbs, just be careful not to use too much. I think portion sizes we underestimate. A genuine portion size is much smaller than we think. I would give a prize to anyone who can eat the correct portion size when it comes to nuts or raisins or something like that. It's only supposed to be the palm of your hand, just a very small bit. But you see people emptying the whole packets and the whole handfuls, and when one is finished, you get another handful. So sometimes sticking to portion sizes is very difficult. So getting a book on what truly is a portion size, that might be very helpful to help us adjust our minds into what a genuine portion size is. Avoiding second helpings, avoiding unhealthy snacks, and using complex carbs judiciously. Next slide. Food labels. This is very important. So get into the habit of reading your food labels. This is supposedly a healthy snack. It's a snack of nuts and raisins, but we can see that of the percentage of calories in this, that carbohydrates are 22 grams. It's the highest amount. And to kind of trick you, they've given you as a percentage of the daily value rather than the percentage of the actual serving. So it looks 7% looks small, but actually when you look at the number of carbohydrates, it's the highest value within this snack. So actually, this is a high carb snack and it's not healthy at all. Next slide. These are cereals. This is taken from the back of a cereal. And you can see that it has some elements of trans fat of 0.02 grams, which is bad in and of itself. It should have no trans fat at all. But then when you look at the carbohydrates, you can see that it's 71.3 grams of carbohydrates and 16 grams of sugar. So this is, again, another high carbohydrate snack. This is out of 100 grams, and you can see that 71.3 grams of that is sugar. So this is something to avoid. Next slide. Again, cereal, again, showing percentages But actually, again, percentages of daily value and not actually the serving. So it's saying at the very top that a serving is 1 cup and that 1 cup is 42 grams. And then it's dropping down to say that the total carbohydrates in that 42 grams is 33 grams. So actually, it's 33 grams out of 42 grams, which is sugar, not just 12% of your daily allowance. So again, when you also read the ingredients, it says corn, whole grain wheat, then the third ingredient is sugar. And then when you go a bit further down, it has corn syrup, honey, molasses. All of these are forms of sugar. So this is why reading your labels are really important. Next slide. We've done that to death. Next slide. So how can we prevent? This says type 2 diabetes, but actually it's also obesity. If you go back up to the slide, so we can see that the chap on the left, he's lost weight because he realized that losing weight was both activity, eating a healthy diet, and getting enough sleep. And by doing that, it helps him to reverse other conditions that come with his obesity, which was type 2 diabetes. Next slide. So to do it naturally takes time. You know, this chap took 2.5 to 3 years to get down to the weight that he was happy with. And he did that essentially naturally. You know, we've got things in society now. We've got different medication options. We've got different surgical options. And people are really looking for quick fixes or things that would do the work for themselves without actually addressing sometimes the underlying cause. And I really have to push it back to patients to tell them, you know, you're in control. We are in control as you know, of what we think and what we choose. Yes, we're operating in a very difficult environment, and that genetics plus the environment has kind of pushed our choices. But we always have to try to remain some semblance of control. And if, you know, this gentleman can do it naturally, we also can have a chance at doing it naturally, but it takes very much a lot of focus. Next slide. So talking about how do you do this? Keep your goal in mind. You know, have a very clear reason why you're doing this and what weight you want to get down to and why. Is it from that BMI chart? You want to get back into the green, you're happy with the yellow, you know, have a very clear focused goal. You know, I remember when I was preparing for my wedding, that was a clear goal in mind. And that was very easy to focus on and to get into shape for. And so a very clear, singular goal is really important. Pay attention to your environment. Our environment and our genes influence our choices. And actually, it takes away some of that control. And so if you want to gain the ultimate control of, you know, of your weight, you need to really control your environment. Should you bring those foods into the house? You know, should you eat at that restaurant? Should you go out with friends to that place where you know there will be high carb, high fat, you know, kind of things? You know, is it okay to have cheat days or not? These are the types of questions you have to answer and really think about it, because if your environment is one that leads towards, you know, eating the wrong foods, that's what you will do. I remember someone counseling ages ago, and they said, we will always turn to what's easiest. We would naturally always turn to what is easiest. So, you know, if you've got a chocolate bar or biscuit, you know, next to your computer whilst you're working versus having to leave the room to get an apple, which you then have to wash and cut, you're not going to go for the apple, you're going to go for the biscuit. So if you flip that around though, and put those things that are high carb, high calorie, not in the house, but you keep things that are, fruit and veg very close to you, with 2 liters of water ready to drink, having these things at your fingertips. That's really important, to control your environment. Another thing about controlling your environment is like building exercise into your day. So rather than parking right at the door of the supermarket, park the furthest spot away and walk towards the supermarket. Use the stairs at work rather than the escalators. Try to walk to work if you can, or cycle to work if you can. Or at lunchtime, that's your time to go out for your walk in the middle of the day, especially as the weather starts to hopefully get a bit nicer. We can try to build time away from our desks in the day to go out into the fresh air for walking. Be accountable. Have someone that is on the journey with you, that can keep tabs on you. Be honest. Don't secret eat. Don't hide away and do things. You've reached for this. Yes, you've reached for this. Okay, I recognize that that's not going to help me get to my goal. How can I reset, refocus, be encouraged to start again? A righteous man falls 7 times but gets back up again, kind of thing. We have to be accountable, be open, and keep pressing towards the mark. Eat slowly. They say you should be chewing your meals, each mouthful between 20 and 32 times before you swallow. And that's something definitely that I can improve on. But chewing your food, savoring the flavors, switching off the television, eating at the table, talking with the family, having nice music on in the background, like hymns and favorites or something like that. And, just having a really nice, colorful, fragrant food that everybody's really happy to enjoy. And just take your time and enjoy eating slowly with the right portion size. These types of things help us to reach our goal. Avoiding temptation aisles and avoiding bringing those foods into the house. Again, trying to control the environment. And again, if we fall off, get back up again. For you only fail if you stop trying, kind of thing. Next slide. So I think this is my last slide yet. So embrace healthy living. We know that if we are at high risk, we need to get checked. So basically, take time, get on the scales, be honest and open, have a genuine look at the scales, get the tape measure out, measure your waist circumference, look at the BMI chart and assess where you are. That's the first step. Once you know where you are, the BMI chart can also help you to decide where you need to be. And that could be your goal. And then once you have your goal, then you have to start to put strategies in place to try to reach that goal. Is it the 2 meals a day? Is it going to be beans, greens, and vegetables? Is it going to be walking in the morning or walking after every meal? Is it going to be changing how you eat, looking at more colorful foods? Is it changing your plate size and going to a smaller plate? Is it drinking water before meals, like half an hour before? We call that preloading. Having soup and then having the main meal, because soup helps to control how much we eat as well after we have it. Putting all of these things into place, looking at more high fiber foods, recognizing you can eat more in the morning and less in the evening. And therefore, if we want to have a carb, we can have that in the morning. So like porridge or something like that is really excellent. And then going less and less during the day. After we eat, going for exercise, just a gentle walk to help, open up those muscles to act as sugar sinks, so we can blunt the amount of insulin potentially that's released. so we can, reduce how much energy we're storing. Getting enough sleep at night. And again, all of this would help us to get down to our healthy weight, which in the picture is what we're reaching for, because health is wealth. Next slide. And that's it, I think.